Hello and welcome to a video about stuffing Gnombleberry from the Leave Gnome Stone Unturned pattern. We're going to stuff in 3 stages. We're going to stuff in the hat, then we'll close up a little bit more, then we'll stuff the body, close up even a little bit more, add the weighted stuffing, and then finish up the gnome. We do it in 3 stages because that way we struggle the least with the amount of awkwardness that happens when you've got a big long thing sort of resisting your stitches. I like to stuff the hat firmly, but not as firmly as the body. The more we can shift the weight to the bottom, the better. We want the center of gravity to be about belly button height if possible. So the hat gets stuffed firmly enough that it is going to hold its shape and just kind of behave nicely, but I have a few tips about how we're going to do that. The first is to always use small amounts of stuffing, especially the narrower we go, the smaller small is. And the reason for this is that if we do large chunks like this, then there are gaps that form because there's bigger gaps. There just is at the angles. That's what the word I'm trying to look for. But if we take smaller amounts and stuff them all together, we kind of fill in all those spots and we tend to get less lumpiness. And the trick with finishing toys is that about half the personality comes in the finishing part. There's about half comes from the knitting and the design, and about the other half comes from how you finish it. So for instance, when we did the tutorials on the stitching here at the side, I said for this Gnombleberry I was going to leave it a little more rustic and a little more what's the word I'm looking for? Shoddy, I guess. It's not the word I'm looking for. Amateurish, because I like, in my head on that day I was telling myself a little story about how someone decided he needed a set of a pocket and sewed it on, and there's just something about that really delighted me that day. Obviously on another one I've done them much more carefully and gotten a more polished look. So finishing has a big part in personality. So I'm going to take a very narrow strip of the stuffing and I'm going to go all the way to the tip. Let's do this. I'm going to flip this up a little bit and then we'll have a little easier time getting to the bottom. If you struggle to get all the way to the tip, you may want to use a chopstick or a straight needle if you've got one that is sort of not too skinny. You need it to be big enough that it's going to be pushing the stuffing rather than just slicing through if it's all skinny. Alright, so we've stuffed the tip, and then as I go in, what I do from now on, I'm going to move that. When I go in with a small amount of stuffing, I push it up and then I use my fingers to kind of brush it out sideways to fill in the whole surface of the inside. And as I'm doing that, what I'm doing is I'm building up almost more of a sedimentary system. So rather than being like a big ball here and a ball here, I'm building layers, and that helps fill it up, and it also helps it, as things settle over time, not sort of change shape. So once I've got the stuffing all the way in, then I use my fingers, and it depends on where I'm at, how many fingers I can get. So here I can only get 2, so I'm just kind of spreading them out and making sure that all the spaces from side to side feel about the same amount of full. And if you feel like, oh, I'm getting a bump here to here because of how I stuffed the first bit to the second bit, what you can do is put your hand up, kind of slide past the stuffing and just kind of push things around and see how it works as you're going. So we'll stuff the hat. And one of the things to watch for when you're stuffing is you want it to be full enough that it has its own heft, its own ability to stand. It holds its shape and it won't collapse. So you don't want it too loose. You don't also want it too tight. For one thing, one of the things that'll happen is that you'll get a big bulge here, and then where we picked up stitches, it's just a little bit less flexible, and you'll get kind of a bulge here, and then it'll go skinny here, and then it'll bump out again, which if you like the look, that's fine. But the other reason we don't want to overstuff is we don't want to distort the stitches. We want them to be firm, but not starting to stretch and distort. So that's just something to bear in mind. So those are my tips for stuffing the hat. My tips for stuffing the body are identical, except I like to pack that a little bit more firmly. As I said, I like to try to do a little bit. The body obviously has more to hold because it's holding the hat plus the body and arms and any other things we're adding. So I stuff the body a little more packed. But again, I'm not distorting the stitches. I'm being careful that I'm keeping things, you know, reasonable. And what I'm going to do is I will continue stuffing the hat, then I will stop. I will continue with the pattern to decrease a little bit more. And when I stuff the body, I'm going to use the same technique. I'm going to kind of build up layers. I'm going to scooch my fingers around in there to kind of spread it to the edges. And I'm going to stuff up to about this third garter ridge. Then that's where I'm going to fill from there downwards with the weighted stuffing. And I'll come back on the video and do that. All right, we have our stuffed hat, we have our stuffed body, and now we will take our weighted stuffing and add it. I like to hold the needles this way. If I was using circular needles, I would have the stitches on the cords, and that would make this a little more flexible for you. And then we're just going to fill this, and we're going to fill it up to this point. We don't want the section with the decreases forms the bottom, and what we don't want is for that bottom to be at all curved. If it's curved, then the gnome will be more wobbly and tippy. So the trick is to fill up to about that last garter ridge. I live where it is cold in the winters and not humid, so we don't have much problem with pests, so I can use dried beans for my weighted stuffing. Pour some in, stuff it down, pour some in, stuff it down. It's usually quite amazing how much weighted stuffing you can get in. It will look full, and then you just kind of move it around and there's more room. It's kind of like dessert. There's always room for dessert. Of course, again, the trick is not to overstuff things. So let's see how we're doing here. That feels pretty good. What we need to do at the very last, I'll put this last one in here. How do we go there? So what we need to do at the end is make a disc-shaped bit of fluffy stuffing, and we need to put it in, and we're going to tuck it all the way to the edge of the bottom section with the decreases. And the reason we do that is because working the gnome at this last little bit gets a little tricky, and as we're working it, what we don't want is that weighted stuffing kind of jumping out. So right now is a really good chance to test where the center of gravity is. Obviously we want it lower is better. You can sort of set it down and see how the gnome stands, whether it wants to go side to side or whether it really does feel like, no, there's a nice bit of weight at the bottom there. You may find that it helps once you're doing this to put it in a cup or a wine glass or something, or just support the weight between your legs as you knit these last few stitches, because we don't necessarily want the weight causing things to get all stretched and the fabric not to be nice and snug. So that's the tips I have for stuffing Gnombleberry. I hope this helps. I'll see you in the next tutorial video. Happy gnoming!